When analyzing any idle problem, check the obvious things first. Things like throttle linkage and cable for sticking or binding, and then connect a scan tool and select data stream. You want to select the data that can affect engine idle. Make sure that you use vehicle-specific information and specifications. You cannot find problems with bad specs. First, the throttle position signal should be within specifications. The TPS voltage, if it's higher than normal, in this case we have 1.29 in our example, our spec says 0.9 to 1.2, so it's higher than normal, or if the TPS is lower than normal, same spec with a 0.78 voltage, lower than normal, check for the following condition. Has the throttle been adjusted to correct for a vacuum leak or carbon buildup in the throttle bore? A very common occurrence. Technicians turn the throttle stop screw to compensate instead of fixing a vacuum leak or cleaning a carbon bore. Make sure if you have this condition, you adjust the throttle correctly before continuing. Then start the engine and allow it to warm up to normal operating temperature. Special note here, all oxygen sensors must be working correctly. All oxygen sensors have to be working correctly in order for you to use long-term field trim for any diagnostics. With any idle problem, check long-term field trim and check both banks if you're working on a V engine. Long-term field trim should be within plus or minus 5. Our example here is 2.3 and 2.0, so we're within the plus or minus 5. On vehicles with high mileage or vehicles that have been poorly maintained, you can add a small fudge factor to it, but they still must stay within plus or minus 10. Use your common sense when adjusting this specification. On a low mileage, highly maintained vehicle, plus or minus 5. Readings with a minus sign in front of them indicate that the PCM is subtracting fuel, and that's to compensate for a rich condition. And remember, a rich condition is too much fuel or too little air. Readings without the minus sign, that indicates that the PCM is adding fuel to compensate for a lean condition. And once again, a lean condition is not enough fuel or too much air. When long-term field trim is higher than normal, you need to check for vacuum leaks. Vacuum leaks are a common cause of idle problems. When long-term field trim is over 10 and under 20, check for a minor vacuum leak. When long-term field trim is over 20, the PCM is compensating for a lean condition, which may cause the engine to run very rough. Once again, vacuum leaks are a common cause of idle problems. You must find and repair any vacuum leaks before continuing to diagnose any idle problems. Go to vacuum leak testing. We have worked on many vehicles referred to us where the technician swore there was no vacuum leaks, and after we tested it, we found vacuum leaks. So check and double check. When long-term field trim is subtracting fuel with the minus sign, it's trying to compensate for a rich condition. Go to fuel injector or fuel pressure volume test. The IAC should be between 15 and 25% at idle. It's going to go higher as engine speed increases, so the spec is at idle. When the IAC percentages are higher than normal with the throttle closed, the PCM is commanding the higher RPM. Check the engine load sensors and the engine temperature sensors. If the park neutral switch state is no, make sure that the gear selector is fully in the park position, and then diagnose the park neutral switch and its circuit, because the park neutral switch state should say yes when it's in park or neutral. If the power steering pressure switch state is yes, make sure you're not turning the steering wheel, because that's when it should say yes. Diagnose the power steering pressure switch and its circuits. When the IAC percentages are lower than normal with the throttle closed, the PCM is commanding the lower RPM. Check for vacuum leaks. Here we are at vacuum leaks again. Go to vacuum leak testing. On scan data that may affect engine idle and needs to be checked by you is the engine coolant temperature sensor, because engine coolant temperature sensor, the ECT, will affect idle if it reads incorrectly. It should match the actual temperature of the engine. Use your Raytech gun, use your temperature measuring device, and compare it to scan data. If it doesn't match, you're going to have to test the ECT sensor and its circuit. The delta, pressure, feedback, EGR position sensor must be within specifications. If it isn't, go to EGR testing. System voltage is very important. It must be within specifications. When the charging system isn't charging correctly, it can cause any number of problems. If the system voltage isn't within specifications, go to Charging System Test. Carefully analyze the data for any input that is signaling the PCM to increase idle speed. Because dirty throttle bores are easy to see, problems in scan data are often overlooked. Don't be the one who overlooked the incorrect scan data.